Often firms who are looking to transact are asking us, how do we know if we're a good fit for a potential partner? And so while it's a big topic, one that we normally spend a couple of months trying to vet and explore, today we're going to talk about 4 primary areas to focus on to quickly determine if you are a fit for a potential partner or not. With hundreds of buyers on the market now, there are endless options for you to consider for a partner/buyer. And we thought it would be helpful to give you some practical means of quickly eliminating those potential partners with whom you would not be a fit. At Alaris Acquisitions, we spend about 1.5 to 2 months with sellers fine-tuning these items before we even discuss buyers. As Abraham Lincoln famously said, "If I only had an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 45 minutes sharpening my axe." Well, we think a similar approach is very wise. Spend a significant amount of time determining your ideal outcome in these areas we're getting ready to discuss. And when you do engage with a buyer, it will be easier for you to determine and identify when your objectives simply don't align. At Alaris, we have landed on 4 primary areas to focus on that will help you with this. And while not an exhaustive list, if you get these dialed in, the odds are your hit rate will be much higher. Now keep in mind, any of these could be showstoppers for you or areas you might be willing to live with. We can't really dive into that here because every firm is different in how they prioritize and weight certain things. If we happen to work together, we would spend a lot of time helping you do just that. But for now, we're just going to focus on what the actual areas are we think you should consider. So the first major area, we call it the structural match. The structural match is the easiest way to determine if there's an obvious misalignment between you and a buyer. These are easy to spot differences between a buyer and a seller's foundational business setup and needs. Examples of structural areas to inquire about or questions you would want to ask would include, what is the fee model that this firm embraces? For instance, if you're a hybrid firm and they're a fee-only firm, would they permit you to maintain a BD affiliation? If not, well, that would likely be a misalignment and therefore a knockout response. Another question might be, which custodians must I utilize if I join their team? If you require custodian X and they don't have custodian X, and they would require you to change custodians, well, they may be knocked out based on their position because that would be a showstopper for you. Another thing you could ask here was, what services do I need to, or do I require to have access to? For example, let's say you had a tax preparation component to your business, and they would not permit you to continue doing that. They might be knocked out on that, or they might not be, but that is an example of a potential fundamental misalignment. Or if you're a corporate trustee and you need to check the custodial box on your ADV, and they're not going to permit you to take custody, then perhaps they would be eliminated on that response alone. We think structural items are usually the easiest component of this process. They're simply business differences between firms that normally neither side are going to budge on. Therefore, if there's not alignment on these things, it's probably a sign you should terminate the dialogue quickly and move on. So the next area would be what we call the deal match. And when we say deal match, it's simply there are certain financial outcomes you need or desire that should the buyer's model not permit, it would signal a possible misalignment or mismatch. So here are some basic data points that you would focus on here to determine if there is a deal match or if there's not a match. Obviously, the first point would be the initial evaluation. Are you looking for the absolute highest bidder, or is it the best cultural fit more important to you, even if that meant you may have a lower initial value? Is it an actual number that you must have before you would move forward with an acquisition? At Alaris, since we know how the buyers price their deals, we can help tell you early if their valuation is in line with your expectations. I would say it's important to be rooted in reality regarding what your practice is worth. You may wish to review some of our content we've generated on how valuations are done and what are the considerations that go into maximizing your value. Another area on the deal match is what we call the currency stack. There's typically 3 forms of currency that are paid for practices. There's cash, deferred cash, and equity. Well, what are your requirements on those 3 items? How much cash do you need? How much, if any, of the buyer's equity would you like to take as a percentage of your total consideration for your practice. Some buyers, for example, don't want to issue any equity in the deal while others require it, which is right for you. So that's the currency stack and how do you want to be paid for the business. Another point on the deal match is the ongoing share of economics. All buyers want you to grow, but they differ greatly in how they incentivize you to grow after the partnership. So what are your needs here? For example, some buyers will give you larger shares of new revenue that you bring in, but they really don't do much to help you bring that revenue in. Others might have a lower revenue share for new assets, but they're awesome at driving organic growth. So which would you prefer? Another item in the deal structure would be the earnout. An earnout is simply a second valuation for growth post-partnership. Are you even looking for a second bite of the valuation economics after the initial deal is done? And what are the growth targets that they would need in order to hit that valuation that they're offering? Are they reasonable? Could you achieve that? Is it an all or nothing earnout, or will they prorate your retained growth to the additional valuation? Another point here would be your retention period. Most transactions release a percentage of the initial valuation at closing, but they're going to hold on to an amount of that value in what's called a retention period to ensure that the clients they acquired remained post-closing. Well, what is the max retention period you would accept, and how do they calculate the revenue measured during the retention period? It's a very important consideration. Closing conditions. What thresholds will you have to meet in order to get to closing? How do they impair your valuation if you don't meet the retention goal? Is there any remedy for you to seek if you miss the retention goal, or do you simply miss the entire retention payment period? Another area here would be, what is the permitted glide path? We know that certain partners want to retire faster than others. Well, what's your timeline to exit the business? And does that align with the buyer's model? Many buyers don't want to acquire a practice wherein the owners are planning an exit in a short period of time, which I would define as typically 2 to 3 years and less. Can they help train your Gen 2 or source your Gen 2 replacement? These are all relevant. The deal terms are slightly more difficult to ascertain, primarily because most buyers won't get into the weeds on these subjects until they're pretty far down the road with you. At Alaris, we think that's a benefit to working with us because we know the buyer models in depth, and thus we can save you a lot of time screening their permissible deal structures against what you need. The third area that we would look for alignment with a potential buyer is what we call the autonomy match. This is the cultural fit, and unfortunately, the phrase cultural fit is probably the least understood term in our industry. We've authored a thorough article about the topic that we'll post here, but the essential issue when discussing culture is most people will define it too subjectively, with words that describe a moral, an ethical, or a social standard like honesty, hard work, fiduciary, someone we would enjoy having a beer with, and yes, we've actually heard that one. And while this is all certainly relevant to determining who you would want to do business with, subjective things are not really useful to determining cultural fit. Who would say that they are not into telling the truth, for example? Well, we prefer to identify mandatory points of alignment from the buyer's perspective. In other words, what does the seller have to agree with? What do they have to do or change in their world to be happy being a part of the buyer's team? For the seller, it's all about autonomy, decision-making. What decision-making are you comfortable giving up? Autonomy is what the seller is willing to give up in decision-making in the buyer's world. So examples of from buyers' points of alignment, things like you coming into our partnership, you must adopt our brand. You must utilize our investment platform and options. You must adapt our practice management model. You must adhere to our client experience or integrate new services like insurance, tax preparation, banking, for example. Those are points of alignment that the buyers would say you've got to agree to do these things. Examples of decision-making that you might be asked to give up would be typically on 6 major points. There's strategic decision-making. Things like what is the client value proposition we're going to pursue? What markets do we want to be in? How are we going to capitalize ourselves? Those are strategic decision-making. Financial decision-making is who manages the P&L? What are our sources of capital? When are we going to sell? These types of decisions. Staffing decisions, hiring and firing. What is the proper staffing mix for my local office? What are the roles and responsibilities that they will have? These are all examples of staffing decisions. Next would be your growth profile. Will I determine my own growth rates, or am I going to be asked to grow and take on new clients? So that's very important in terms of decision-making. The client experience, which is typically your investment recommendations and financial planning recommendations. Well, do you control that locally, or does that now get centralized to a home office? So, figuring out, can you manage money locally, or you have to centralize that? That's a very important client experience type of decision making. Next would be your calendar. Do you control when and where you work? Do you need permission to take time off? These types of things. So knowing what you must agree to do, which is points of alignment, and what decisions you will retain versus being forced to divest is critical. For example, if you prefer to manage money but your partner does not permit that, well, that would be an autonomy mismatch. If you want to divest all practice management responsibilities to your new partner, but they don't even have that capability, that would be a point of alignment mismatch. So having the correct autonomy match and points of alignment is essential to making a partnership work. This is the actual cultural fit test that everyone talks to. We just define it more pragmatically. The next area would be the client and the advisor experience. So the last step, we think, in making a correct partnership selection is the client-advisor experience match. The client experience is their overall position on how they deliver value to their clients. For example, if your potential partner had a financial planning core value proposition wherein, but you were an asset manager, and so you really weren't into financial planning, well, that would be a client experience mismatch. On the investment side, if you're a tactical portfolio manager and your partner is a DFA shop, well, that would be an investment mismatch. So that's a mismatch on the client experience. The advisor experience is a bit more subjective. That's when you get into personalities of your new partner. It could be things like, does the tech stack that they have make an improvement on your tech stack? Does their expectation of growth meet with yours? So, that's an example of the advisor experience. So I know I just threw a lot at you, and frankly, we normally take, as I said, 1 to 2 months to unpack all of this with each seller we work with. So try not to be overwhelmed. And again, this isn't an exhaustive way to determine if you're a good fit with any specific buyer, but using this method as a roadmap has served us well in nearly 100 acquisitions to choose the right partner. So I hope that was helpful. We look forward to hearing from you soon. I'm Alan Darby, CEO of Alaris Acquisitions. I'm looking forward to meeting you soon.